So my name is Ugo Vallauri, and I am a PhD student at Royal Holloway University of London as part of the ICT4D Collective. And my work as part of my PhD is on rural agricultural development in Kenya, in particular the role of ICTs and mobile-based ICTs in the context of rural agricultural development.
And you are also researching on assistive technologies, is that correct?
Yes, another piece of work I'm doing, and that's been work that I've been doing in particular in collaboration with Computer Aid International as part of my work with them, has been in the role of, in developing free and open source solutions for assistive technologies. In particular, we've been working on a software currently in a beta version called MagMe, which we're currently working with partners in Kenya to develop further. And we're presenting some of the issues around this particular free and open source necessity in the context of assistive technologies in a seminar at ICT4D 2010.
And what does the software MagMe actually do?
Right. MagMe is a free and open source software that increases dramatically the options for people that are visually impaired under Windows operating system to magnify anything on the screen in whether it's just a strip of the screen horizontally, vertically, the full screen, or just a small window, and allowing users to change contrast on the screen, the set of colors, different color schemes, and other tweaks to, for example, the mouse pointer, so that it becomes more appropriate for people that have low vision. And it's designed to work together with free and open source screen readers, particularly NVDA, non-desktop visual access, which is the leading free and open source project in this area out of Australia.
You said it works on Windows.
Yes.
It works only on Windows, right?
Yes. Well, it was really a decision. There is already very good support for blind and visually impaired users under Linux. And there is people developing a complete blind and visually impaired user-friendly version of Ubuntu called Linux. So the decision was, we're not in a position to advise people to switch, and in many cases this is not possible. Therefore, it's probably more appropriate to provide a good option that will work in any internet cafe, at any employers you might be working at, in any university, or anywhere you might not even own a computer, so that if you are to be using Windows for whatever reason, that is a very good and free software for that. There is no political choice in terms of the operating system. Obviously, there is a very strong political, if you will, decision in terms of why we develop this software, why we are developing this software, which is that if you are a blind or visually impaired computer user in the developing world, you are very unlikely to receive any welfare funding to acquire expensive software in this domain. And part of the reason why such software is so expensive is because it's subsidized in many cases in the West, therefore by governments and by programs for inclusion, which are not there for people in most of the rest of the world. And if you look at the cost of such equipment, for example, such software, for example, if you look at the cost of proprietary screen readers, they could cost up to $1,000 per person. So there is no way people can have access to that kind of solution in the developing world.
Because for such companies, there is no market in Africa, for example, right?
Yeah, it's very complicated. Companies will have Well, they have attempted a number of different approaches to this. One, they have the same products at the same price. In some cases, they've come up with a smaller version of the same software, kind of targeting the developing world, especially to be provided as part of development initiatives. But even then, the cost is still at about $150 or $200 per user. And again, this is not a solution, and at the same time, you're compromising on the number of features. So there is a tension that cannot be solved under the current market structure. This is what we felt. This is why we felt it was fundamentally important to come up with something that was completely free.
Okay.
Do you think your software is going to compete in the old markets as well?
No, the software would not really compete in terms of functionalities with the very expensive ones, because those ones can provide, at least for now, a much more sophisticated layer of customizability and scriptability for a number of additional uses. But it's also true that most users use only a limited number of features, and yet those features are not available for free to such users. So there is a space for something that is really free, and so not just low cost, and provides a starting point for further development. And perhaps, and this is our vision, that a stronger and stronger developer community will come out of this, and as a result, they will one day compete. And perhaps this is the best possible outcome. But for now, we'll be happy to provide good enough functionalities that will not be a final goal, but a starting point for further developments.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned you have a session here at the conference, but that is not your only role, right?
Yes, I have. We are running a session together with Joyujit Pal, and we're featuring colleagues from Kenya as well. Although unfortunately they're not here with us, they'll be with us on Skype link. Because ultimately, what really is important for people in the ICT4D space is to understand the real constraints that organizations such as our partners, Kenyan Union of the Blind in Kenya, face when it comes to training visually impaired and blind computer users in being more efficient with access to information and be productive with the user computer. Well, after a training, if they cannot give them a copy of the software, then what's the point?
Yeah.
So, no one will have $1,000 to spend to procure such software. So they'll be providing that kind of feedback to us during the session.
Okay. And you're also the social activity manager, so to say, of this conference?
Yes, I'm. Thankfully, we are a fantastic team of people behind this, and we are organizing a couple of fun events for people to socialize in different ways. Yesterday we had an opening jam session, open mic, which really people seem to have enjoyed it quite a bit, and that makes us very, very happy, because ultimately it happened that way just because everyone was so willing to share and come on stage. And as some people remarked, it's great because usually at conferences you have a very networking oriented sessions, and people try to just exchange frantically business cards and contacts, but actually showing another face of who we are as persons, I think is quite exciting. And we'll have another session tomorrow night, which is with a great collective of DJs and musicians from London called Ftang, who will be performing a mix of DJs play together with a trumpet player and a percussionist, world beats, especially well, with influences coming from African music and Latin American vibes, and would be very fun.
So what's your resume so far of the conference after 1.5 days, so to say?
Well, after a day and a half, I can say that people are extremely happy and very energized from the conference so far. And well, it's hard to say, you don't want to judge a conference that you are part of the organizing team too much. But I'm very happy with how things are going, and I met people that I should have met before, so this is certainly great. And there's great ideas, and there seems to be real discussion for issues that have always been left out, and it's a great time to actually confront some of these issues, and not just repeat always the same good old stories. So it's good.
Could you give us an example of one of these issues which not have currently come up, but just now at this conference, for example?
Well, let me just think for a sec. Well, for example, one of the papers this morning actually captures one of the key issues. We're talking about ICTD or ICT4D, and obviously there is a big focus on Africa. However, at the same time, we don't really have that many African researchers involved in this. The same field, or what the field is supposed to mean, is defined elsewhere. So when you go and talk about ICT4D with African colleagues, and it happened to me a lot, as I've been living in Kenya and working with colleagues across the continent quite a bit over the past 4 years, the definition is completely different, and many people are talking about Africa or different countries within Africa, but not that many people from there are involved in the very research. So there is a very good paper pointing this out in very alarming ways today, and so people discussing about this in a bit more open way as a result of that session, which I think is great.
You have a media and communication background doing agricultural projects.
Yeah.
And how does that go together? What changed?
Yeah.
All
Yes.
last week?
Yes. All right. So actually, yeah, the core of my work, academic work, is on the role of ICTs, mobile ICTs, in rural agricultural development in Kenya. And well, we've seen a lot of, I'd say, M4D hype and a lot of mobile hype over the past 2 years, and it's nowhere yet ready to stop, I think. At the same time, I think when you actually go and do research in the field, you immediately realize that things are much more complicated than they sound on paper. And particularly in my case, I've just recently spent a month doing research in Kenya across different rural communities in various regions of the country. And well, what I've noticed is, yes, most of the people that I was interviewing had a phone of their own, and a few of them didn't have it, but were having access to a phone within their household. But obviously the phones that you will find in rural parts of Kenya, as is probably for most other sub-Saharan African countries, are the most basic phones. Primarily, I have to say, the Nokia 1100 or 1200. So a lot of the discussion about applications and this whole app world that seems to be dominating a lot of the discussions about ICTs and rural development, I find it a little bit nonsense, because ultimately applications for these phones are completely different from the applications that people are excited developing in most universities elsewhere. So that's one big thing. And personally, I've always had a lot of reservations about this unique role of mobiles in agriculture, especially associated with the whole market information system narrative, particularly because, well, especially when you actually visit groups that do have mobile phone, but they're located 15 kilometers of mud from any real road. And with real road, I mean a road where a truck could go and pick their produce, for example. Well, then you realize that it takes much more than a mobile phone access to get a better market. And when everyone I met over my recent research trip was talking about market problems they have. And the problem is that they have produce in most communities. Most people produce very similar kind of crops, and ultimately there is not very much market available locally, and they are still exploited by dealers and middlemen, just as they were before the mobile phone came. So in that respect, I think we should put aside for a moment the debate on apps and concentrate much more on institutional links that, perhaps facilitated by the usage of ICTs, can really extend the reach of such communities into wider markets at a fairer price. Because this is the main issue. If you want to reach out to Nairobi, you don't have, for example, in the context of Kenya, and you are 500 kilometers away with terrible roads around you, you're not going to find a way to easily market your product at a fair kind of price. Together with that, just like as a nice conclusion, is I was doing some research with extension officers in Kenya and trying to learn what are their constraints and challenges. And out of all the ICT issues we discussed, the one issue that was emerging was the lack of motorcycles for them to be more efficient in reaching out to more people face to face throughout their day. And I think this is a nice reminder, not really against the ICT role, but to just put things in perspective. Yes, ICTs can facilitate a lot of exchanges, but they're not the only element, and they're not magically solving issues of mobility, which are still necessary even and especially in rural Africa.